and development. So far we've talked about the state of things in development. Yeah, so we said like that what development actually could be, what poverty could be, and so on. We could say that we were arguing basically how to describe things, yeah, like how to explain things, the current state of things. However, at the same time, we have very, very limited time, yeah, like, and that's why we didn't talk much about what could be done to kind of solve the problem, or at least like kind of make it not as pronounced. So today we'll talk a bit about trade and see trade maybe as a kind of one way to solve these problems with development. Or let's say problems of development, yeah. That's why today we'll talk about, yeah, like questions which are what is the role of trade for development? I don't know what's written 2 times, but yeah, what's the role of trade for development? Maybe what's the role of development for trade? That's also kind of relative. And then we'll see how trade policy can affect development. Yeah, that's important because we could think about this as an opportunity for a country. Yeah, so trade is a great opportunity because you can sell something that you produce and nobody else have, or at least like not so many countries have it. And it gives you a lot of opportunities to, first of all, raise some funds, yeah, like to give jobs to people, give money to your economy, and so on. So trade is actually a good thing. Yeah, like trading is super nice, it's efficient, and especially small countries, or like let's say not only small, but countries which are not super developed can benefit from this dramatically. Why do developed countries benefit from this not as much? Because, or like, at least for them, it's not so crucial because they can also have domestic markets which are big, yeah, which are full of money, and then of course, even if they don't sell things abroad, some things can be easily sold inside the country, and this is good for them. This is another way to, once again, employ people, pay them money, and so on and so on. So, but for smaller countries, smaller in economic sense, yeah, like for low and middle income countries, trade allows to provide better choices in prices, quality, variety of products. First of all, for domestic consumers. So it's not only about selling things that you produce, it's also buying things from abroad. Yeah, so imagine something not very from even development literature. Yeah, so we, as kind of Russian customers, we greatly benefit from better choices of prices and quality. For example, if we talk about, let's say, mobile phones, yeah, like we can buy mobile phones. All of them are produced abroad, or most of them. I guess I don't know if we have Russian mobile phones yet, but most of us definitely don't use them. Yeah, like we buy something like from foreign producers, kind of enjoy it, and yeah, we have like a full range of prices, quality, variety, and so on. It's just, yeah, like hard to produce that much and that much of a variety in Russia. Especially also, it's hard to assemble even these phones in Russia because most workers who can do this would charge you higher salaries. And so this is the thing. For producers from low country, from small countries, it opens opportunities in terms of a larger market. Yeah, so if you have a country of 500,000 people, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to limit your production with your domestic market. Yeah, you can sell things abroad, and you remember we talked about these economies of scale, that maybe if you're having a larger factory, it will become cheaper to produce per unit. Yeah, so, and that's why you can benefit from increasing your market scope. So if you sell things abroad, you can sell your goods cheaper, not only abroad, but also at the domestic market. Another thing is that exporting firms, like firms that export, so like they have to sell things abroad. Now they need more workers. They need to hire people. They give them salaries. Yeah, like they provide jobs. At the same time, people can start learning something, because normally export-oriented firms are more technologically advanced than the domestic firms. Yeah, because it's quite likely that to produce internationally, you cannot sell everything, yeah, at the world market. You need something quite good. Yeah, like that's why people who work at these factories can learn, they can increase their skills, and so on. And at the same time, they have to be initially kind of good, yeah, like to get to these exporting firms, and that's why they expect higher salaries for being kind of good workers. And then, of course, investments into the country are much more likely to happen if you have trade. Yeah, so like if you can open a factory, for example, in Bangladesh, where you create T-shirts, yeah, for the whole world, of course, this is more likely to attract investments from abroad compared to the situation when you open a shop for T-shirts only for Bangladesh people. Yeah, like it's maybe not as attractive. And of course, technologies. Yeah, like if you open these firms, factories, let's say to assemble phones, you also transfer some technology. Yeah, so like, and it's technology not coming from rich to poor countries. So people also learn something. Maybe they will learn it to the extent that they will be able to innovate something themselves, and so on and so on. What's the main difference of role of trade for development and high-end development? It's actually, I can't say it differs. I wouldn't say it's different role of trade in developed and developing countries. So it's the same, more or less, with only exception. Exactly, the impact is different. So because the basis is different. So if you don't invest into the US to open your technological startup, US will not notice it. Yeah, like because it has a huge market. It's fully fine being alone. However, in developing countries, this impact can be crucial because it gives so much more opportunities, new opportunities that were not there before. Yes, like you couldn't sell your goods domestically, or not as much. And now you can become an international company, you can hire more people, or you can transfer technology. Again, yeah, like if you open a factory in Germany, most likely it's very hard to hire workers here that will not really understand your technological process. Yeah, because to become a worker at the factory, you need to have like a special degree of factory worker, which is not a higher education, but it's still kind of advanced. So yes, for developed countries, all these processes have already happened before. Yeah, for developing countries, it's a new opportunity, to have larger markets, better technologies, and so on. All right. However, I told you trade is so cool, yeah, like it's so nice, it gives so much opportunity. However, not always. Unfortunately, there are also losers of trade. One of them is that firms, or especially farmers, there's kind of an example in, especially in developed countries. Yeah, so the farmers are driven out of business, so they lose jobs. Why is it the case? Because yeah, somebody else in say Ecuador can produce at the lower price, than, for example, German producers. Yeah. Now with the global world, we can actually transfer even agricultural goods from Ecuador quite fast and efficiently, so that we don't need German farmers anymore. And this happens not only in the farming industry, of course, it also happens to some factories. Yeah, when you close factories in developed world and transfer them to developing countries, it's also possible. But yeah, job losses is more, at least at this stage now, is more a problem of developed countries. However, now with this automation, yeah, with like robots taking over, more and more industries actually close their factories in developing countries and transfer businesses back to developed ones. This is kind of this reverse process, but this is a very recent phenomenon, and we don't really know what will happen to it. Another thing is that if prices fluctuate in the world market, it's harder to control and predict them. Yeah, so imagine before you had like a very nice local economy, everything was stable. Yeah, like North Korea, yeah, like nothing happens there. Like no prices fluctuate in North Korea. However, once they open to the world market, yeah, like they could see that this volatility in the world markets can affect domestic prices now too. Yeah, like if, for example, prices increase, for you as domestic producers, it doesn't make sense to sell goods for cheap in your domestic market because you can orient to the international ones and sell everything there. So that's kind of, price fluctuations can be dangerous for the whole economy, at least for consumers, domestic consumers. But there are other cases when other groups can be affected. Environment. I told you about this example of clothing factories in Bangladesh, and many of you have heard, yeah, like these stories about low standards of, and this is the same actually with the last point with the working condition, about very poor working condition, and everybody knows that like environmental standards are maybe not as high as in Europe, yeah, because in Europe you cannot just dump all these like chemicals into the water. No, it's forbidden. And in the developing countries, these international companies have much more power because everybody understands that they give jobs, they give investments, which are very important for the country. And sometimes they can do also bad things there, yeah, like, and everybody will kind of say it's all right. Now there is kind of more pressure on international corporations, so they say like, no, you shouldn't do this. And consumers in developed countries are kind of very cautious about it. But yeah, only about those things that they know. You can always hide it. Working conditions is the same. So maybe if you go to countries where people can provide cheaper labor, it's also not only due to the fact that people agree for lower salaries, it's also probably due to the fact that people agree for worse conditions. Yeah, so they don't need, like in Europe, you need like provide workers with like proper rest, good light, and all conditions that they can health will be kept safe. Yeah. In Bangladesh, you can be easier with this. Yeah, like if people don't like it, they can leave. They nobody keeps them at the factories as slaves. Yeah, like they don't like something, they are free to go. However, maybe it's not very nice of these companies. Yeah, if they intentionally provide like very bad working conditions for workers in developing countries, and it's again not only the problem of firms entering international firms entering these market countries. It's also the problem of local legislation. So people would like to go somewhere where conditions are better, but at the same time they have nowhere to go. So when we talk about factories opening in developing countries, it's not always bad because working conditions are quite likely to be not worse, maybe they're even better than the working conditions that were there in the country in the past. So everybody knows that, all right, we can have it, and this is completely okay. This is even better than before, even though in our standards it's still super, super low and super dangerous. All right. Who is trading? Who trades in the world? And here we see like it's data from 2017, but we see that the world, interestingly, value of exports and value of imports don't match in the world also. And so the world exports slightly less than it imports. Does anybody know why is it the case? Why do we have higher imports than exports in the world, where actually it should be equal? Because everything that you export, all goods that you sell, should be bought by someone. But this doesn't happen. Does anybody have an idea?
Maybe some products are not bought.
Something might be not delivered. Yeah, so like you sold it, but it doesn't arrive to the country. However, this would actually be the opposite way. Yeah, like because exports would be then higher than imports. In reality, it's a very technical thing. You have it at your trade course. It's about different prices. So SEF and pulp. Yeah, so like exports is normally calculated as in terms of free on board, so this FOB. So it's basically you sell things and that's it. While for imports, price of a good includes also cost, insurance, and freight. So you need to not only pay for the good, but you have to insure it, transfer it, and that's why here you pay slightly more for imports. All right. We see that developed countries are actually they still like trading more, but we see that the growth, especially high for transition economies, but that's all right. But developing countries also like growing fast, and except for Africa and maybe even America, but we see that this is actually this is about imports. Yeah, like exports are growing everywhere faster than developed countries. So basically, we see that development is quite likely to be export, maybe not driven, but associated with exports. Yeah, so like countries, we see that they export more and more, and that results in the fact that they also have economic growth. Like in developed countries, we don't see much growth because like everything is already quite well developed. Yes, and if we look at the developing countries, of course, we have to understand that China is one of the kind of leading exporting countries, so it kind of contributes significantly. But even without China, you'll see a very significant growth of exports. Yeah, so countries are trading more and more nowadays, and also developing countries. That's good. Why do people trade? Yeah, like I talked about this already in the beginning, but like, what are the main reasons to trade? So like for small countries, it's beneficial because it's also beneficial to import. You know, like not only to export to give this like use these larger markets, but it's also beneficial because they can get more goods than they potentially can produce. Yeah, imagine a little European country which would be like, let's say Finland. Yeah, Finnish people consume a lot of like a large variety of goods, and of course, to produce all of them domestically, it will be very expensive because for all this like huge variety that they consume, they just don't have as many people, you know, like to keep everybody occupied. At the same time, it's also important for them to sell. Yeah, because as I told you, global markets are much larger. You can sell more goods, give more people jobs, and so on. And another thing is that the government can severely interfere in the process. So the government can establish trade policies that are facilitating trade. Yeah, one of them is import substitution, something familiar to us. Maybe it doesn't work in our case as it should be, but sometimes it's in some countries it actually works. The production of goods and services to replace imports. Yeah, like you say, like, all right, we need to produce our own cheese instead of buying it abroad. And then you say, like, all right, we give subsidies, we give some, maybe we introduce taxes for foreign cheese and so on. And then normally, this will create this import substitution. Maybe at some point it will become bigger, the industry will become big enough to also enter the international market. And normally this how this should work. Another thing is export orientation. And so basically from the beginning, the government tells, all right, we need to focus on the producing goods for the global market. So we don't really focus much on domestic one, we focus on the global market. This is a perfect example of China. Yeah, so China was export oriented from the beginning of their kind of this big development story. And this was like very easy for them to, you know, like focus on something very cheap, very simple to produce, but something that was needed all over the world. And then slowly they were making these processes more and more complex. Yeah, they started with like t-shirts, then they went to electronics. Now they're doing like super high technology development. Yeah, like 5G is like partially introduced here in partially developed in China as the technology. So they become more and more complex in their operations. At the same time, workers who were working in these factories, yeah, they were getting more and more skilled. They were getting higher salaries, and at some point, Chinese economy has grown up so much that it's still very kind of export oriented, but now it's also like the domestic market is huge, it's super powerful, and now we already know, yeah, that like foreign companies are very keen on kind of having access to this market. Yeah, like everybody wants to have access to Chinese market because everybody understands that there we have a lot of people who are relatively well off. They can pay money for your goods. And this all started with export orientation. We have a theory of comparative advantage. You remember this Ricardo story about about comparative advantages, and it has three clear implications. One of them is that if you trade, generally, yeah, you can increase your welfare. That's the basic idea about this comparative advantage story. Yeah, developed already somewhere in the 19th century, maybe 18th. No, I think 19th. So basically, you can earn at the world market. That's what it means. And also you can save at the world market because you can sell your goods more expensively there and buy something cheaper. At the same time, smaller countries can have larger potential for trade. Why is it the case? Because they simply have not enough people to do all types of goods. Yeah, they have to focus on something, on one particular good, and this allows them to fully kind of use their potential. Yes, and of course you can benefit from trade way more if you export goods that are produced in a sector that uses this abundant factor, and the opposite way. So basically you exploit resources which you have a lot and try to get for this output something that's produced using the factor which you don't have. Again, very, very kind of intuitive mechanism. So basically, if you can do something well and cheap, you should focus on this and wait for something that you don't do. Yeah, and this is something that you get through trade. The model, the Ricardo's model, I guess you all know this, but just to remind you, two goods, two countries, only one factor of production, let's say it's labor. And of course, labor productivity differs across countries and also differs across industries. And so in some countries you're better at producing one thing, in some countries you're better at producing other things. Of course, we here simplify the model of labor. In reality, we could think about this as, for example, capital labor ratios. Yeah, so for some capital labor ratios, you need one type of industry. For others, you need completely different things. In this Ricardo model, we don't assume any migration. So it's like, all right, there is no migration. And labor is employed fully. Yeah, so like everybody works. Yes, and markets are perfectly competitive. So meaning that we have no taxes, no trade barriers, and so on. This is to simplify the story. Goods are homogeneous, so like we don't differentiate between quality and so on. And again, we assume no transport costs. Yes, so many simplifications. And in the end, we have these endowments and specialization. So, Remember, we have two types of advantage. One is relative, another one is absolute. The relative advantage means that you can produce something. Let's start with an absolute advantage, with the lower part. So absolute advantage means that you can produce something cheaper than another country. And in this case, for example, US has an absolute advantage in production of both microchips and T-shirts. Yeah, because the price of one microchip is 2, price of one T-shirt is 4, while in Bangladesh everything is higher. All right, that's good. We know that US is a more efficient, more kind of productive country. However, it doesn't mean that Bangladesh is kind of doomed. We can also look here and see the relative advantage. And then we see we define relative advantage through alternative costs. So alternative cost to produce one microchip in the US, a worker has to sacrifice 4 T-shirts. Yeah, because in this example, in case A, yeah, so like, because if the worker produces one microchip, yeah, it is basically, the worker is busy and he cannot produce T-shirts at the same time. And that's why, while the worker produces one microchip, it doesn't produce 4 T-shirts. While in Bangladesh, when the worker produces one microchip, instead, he could produce something like half a T-shirt already by then. All right, so basically, in this case, Bangladesh has a relative production of T-shirts, because the opportunity cost of producing T-shirts is much higher. Oh, sorry, is much lower. No, wait, sorry. I'm getting confused all the time here. Right, yes. So for Bangladesh, workers producing T-shirts, workers should better produce T-shirts instead of producing microchips, because they are relatively more efficient in this case. While in the US, workers should produce microchips because they can do this better than T-shirts. Yeah, and they lose kind of more resources if they produce T-shirts instead of producing microchips. That's the idea. All right, here it's explained way better. So US has a relatively lower cost of production of microchips compared to Bangladesh. 4 hours of labor in the US can be used in 2 ways. Yeah, like one way is to produce one T-shirt or produce 2 microchips. So you have to sacrifice one T-shirt, 2 microchips for one T-shirt, or one T-shirt for 2 microchips. In Bangladesh, the situation is a bit different. To produce one microchip, you need to sacrifice 2 T-shirts. And so it's kind of the opposite. This is in autarky, when we don't really trade. And so when we have trade, so international specialization, trade specialization, and if we believe that goods exchange at 1-to-1, so terms of trade are equal to 1, we say that like if workers in the US work for 4 hours, they can produce 2 microchips, export them, and get 2 T-shirts. And you see, this is one more than in autarky. So before trade, you could, in these 4 hours, you could produce only 1 T-shirt. Now you can produce 2 microchips, sell them, and get 2 T-shirts. All right, 1 T-shirt more. At the same time, Bangladesh can produce 2 t-shirts, export them, and get 2 microchips. Yeah. One more than before trade. So basically, both countries gain from specialization. But here we need to draw graphs. Sorry, I'll show you. No. I have to show you the graph. So normally I draw them by hand on the board, but I don't have the board, so I can do this. So I can do it. No. All right. Yeah. Sorry, it will take quite long to find it. What we need to know here about the graphs? Yeah, like we draw production possibility frontiers. And production possibility frontiers, so it tells us they are linear here in this exercise. So we can see that yeah, instead of reducing in autarky, you can focus on something, and this line of exchanging goods, yeah, like this one-to-one line, allows you both countries to consume above the production possibility frontier. Yeah, that's the idea. I guess you'll have a trade course here will be explained kind of more thoroughly. Now we're coming to the Heckscher-Ohlin model, another model which considers trade and trade between like countries, and it's a bit more advanced already than Ricardo model in the sense that it tells that country exports products that use abundant factors of production more intensively and imports products that require relatively more scarce factors. What does it all mean? It means that basically if you have a lot of cheap labor, you should focus on using it and exporting things that are produced using cheap labor. While at the same time, if you have a lot of capital and not so many people, you should focus on capital intensive goods and sell them, capital intensive goods, and not focus on labor. That's the idea. So basically do something that you are naturally predetermined to do better. Assumptions. Has a lot of assumptions, but like all of them are quite simple and straightforward. So we believe that we have perfect competition in homogeneous goods. Yeah. So meaning that you don't say like I don't buy from China because quality is worse. No, we say we believe that the quality is the same all over the world. It's a big assumption, but at the same time, it's not so unrealistic. Factor proportion. So like we care about the relative endowment of goods, not the absolute endowment. Absolutely. Of course, a large country, so for example, US, has both a lot of capital and a lot of labor. But what we care about is this capital labor ratio. That's what determines this story. production function is the same across countries, have constant returns to scale. Factor intensity is also kind of stable, so we don't say that like it kind of has decrease in marginal returns or something like this. No, let's say it's constant, not to complicate the model. And preferences are determined by prices, so they're homothetic. Yeah, alternatively, they could be also driven, but not only by prices, but by factors like individual preferences and so on. This would also complicate the whole story. So consumers only want to choose the number of goods they consume and not something more advanced. Capital and labor are mobile within the country, but between industries. However, they are not mobile across countries. So we say like there is no migration. And of course, we have no barriers to trade. So now let's say we have two goods, cars and textile. But if cars and textile are produced, we can expect that something is more capital demanding, something is more labor demanding. So or intensive. Yeah. So like basically to produce cars, you need more capital than labor, and to produce textile, you need more labor than textile. Yeah, this is kind of to differentiate between two types of industry. And let's say we have two countries, North and South. South is capital abundant, relatively. Oh, sorry, North is capital abundant, and South is labor abundant. It's all in relative terms. So basically, we have to look at these inequalities. So it tells here that capital labor ratio in the North is higher than capital labor ratio in the South. The opposite happens with the labor capital ratio. Yeah, so labor capital ratio is higher in the South than in the North, which is the same. Yeah, like it's the two inequalities are the same. It's just to show you like the interpretation. And we know that production of cars is capital intensive. Yeah, so you need more capital than labor in production of cars than in production of textiles. And for labor, for textile, it's the opposite. We need more labor produced to produce textile than capital. Right, that's it. Production possibility frontiers are again, you know how production possibility frontiers look like. Yeah, so you draw two axes, capital and labor, you connect maximum endowment of these two countries, and then you see on which part of the curve you are to see your production in the autarky. When you can specialize, you just go to the corners and draw the new quasi-production possibility frontier with the price vector. And then you see how much you can get from trade. So we know that if domestic prices are determined by this tangency of production possibility frontier and individual consumption. Yeah, so like we know that, yeah, what is the kind of the price vector? Yeah, price vector comes through this production possibility frontier and in the point where it intersects with your utility function. Yeah, so that's kind of tangency point to both of them, and we know this is optimal. So if we talk about this South, the production possibility frontier will be steeper. Yeah, so steeper means it's kind of more vertical, so that the price in autarky, relative price, is also steeper. So domestic prices, for example, of textile relative to cars will be lower than corresponding ratio in North. What does it mean? That basically, if you're as a South country, if you have an advantage in production of t-shirts, that means that you can buy them also in this country cheaper than in the North. That's super intuitive. However, if you talk about cars in the South, of course, cars are more expensive than in the North relatively, just because you don't have this advantage in production of cars. And when countries open to trade, this international price kind of is something in between the two autarkic prices. And so now, instead of selling t-shirts very cheaply in your South country, you can start selling them more expensively in the North, while for North, instead of selling cars only in your North country, you can also sell them to the South. And then you see that you basically trade t-shirts for cars, and the price ratios kind of converge. Like they become something in between the two old autarkic prices. And then in the end, this is beneficial because you can get the good that was cars before. So for example, in case of South, you can get more cars cheaper. And for this you have to pay slightly higher price for t-shirts, but they were cheap before, so you can kind of afford these rising prices. However, like this is like kind of a nice story I'm telling you. However, it didn't always happen that smoothly and kind of nicely. Yeah, at some point we had this export pessimism, like from Prebisch-Zinger hypothesis, and so like which tells us that in the long run, like if you kind of do this trading for a very long time, prices of primary product exports on the world market tend to fall relative to prices of manufactured goods. So basically, it tells us that as the world generally, the world develops, we have our primary product exports become cheaper, relatively cheaper, because the goods that you manufacture become more and more complex. So like now, for example, electronics, like it's super complex devices full of technology, while resources are still the same. Like if you extract oil, like oil doesn't become different from oil like 100 years ago. It's still the same type of good. All manufactured goods keep on become more and more complex. That's why they become more expensive. And probably developing countries, are kind of trapped here because this Heckscher-Ohlin model forces them to stay in the production of something very, very cheap and something that doesn't get more expensive, or something that gets relatively cheaper than this way. There are many reasons for that. One of them is that there is Engels' law. So like, this Engels' law, that if you become richer, you don't you spend less and less in relative terms on basic goods. Yeah, like for example on food. So like the richer you are, the smaller share of your budget is spent on food. Yeah, because you can increase the quality of the food you eat and so on. But at some point you reach kind of the maximum. And yeah, like if you are rich, you don't eat like I don't know 10,000 calories. Yeah, like you don't need it. So here, a bit more kind of advanced version of Engel's law tell us that the demand for stable and prices are stagnant, and demand for manufacture is income elastic. So like if you produce something that like basic, prices for it are stagnant. Yes, like you cannot increase them much more. However, this manufacturing is not something we need, and it's super income elastic. So there you can say like, all right, I will increase prices as demand increases. And demand increases with income. So another thing is this technological change in manufacturing. So we can substitute raw materials with synthetics. Yeah, so like instead of using heavily relying on natural resources, now developed countries can say like, all right, we don't need them that much anymore. We can simply specialize on kind of advanced chemistry, and we can synthesize some materials, and yeah, synthetic materials will be not worse. Yeah, so for example, this is what happened with like, I think explosives. So with explosive, yes, I think the element was called potassium or something like this. So yeah, like in the First World War, Germany was heavily dependent on consumption, on supplies of resources from Latin America, because yeah, there you could get, I think you will get in, what do you get? Potassium or something like this. Maybe it was some components of explosives. Maybe not potassium, maybe sulfur. I think sulfur. Yeah. And then the enemies of Germany said like, all right, it's kind of easy to switch them off. We just have to cut down the supplies from Latin America. Yeah, like we cut down the supplies. We make oceans kind of very unsafe, and that's why Germany will have a severe problem with explosives. And this is what really happened. But this has facilitated this technological development, and then the German industry was able to develop new explosives which were not dependent on the natural resources. They were kind of more they were synthetic. They were much more powerful, but did not need much resources. So technological change is something happening and something deterring this demand from raw materials. And finally, we know that manufacturing firms in high-income countries have more market power. Yeah, like these international evil corporations, which can dictate basically prices. Yeah, so nobody else will buy these raw materials except for them. Yeah, so like, because they have something like a monopoly power. But in terms of consumers, so like it's monopsony. At the same time, yeah, primary producers really face more competition. Yeah, they have to decrease their prices, yeah, so that somebody buys their goods. That's why manufacturing goods face very, very little room for, they have very little room for this increasing their prices, increasing the markup, so they're kind of limited in this opportunity. All right. Now, the last thing is the Dutch disease. You might have heard about this, the Dutch disease. So it's an economic thing. And here we know that Dutch disease is something kind of significant. It's important to remember about it because we see that if you're an exporting country, you have to be careful actually about exports, because if you have a very, very fast development of this exporting sector, and often this is, of course, happens to natural resources, like because they have the price fluctuations are especially high. When it's one commodity, it's kind of simpler. It basically, what happens? Like your currency becomes more expensive because like have inflow of money in foreign currency because you have high exports. Yes, like you sold a lot of natural resources, and that's why you get revenue for it in foreign currency, say like into dollars. And this money has to be converted into your local currency because like you consume in local currency, like you as the guy who's, I don't know, extracting oil from the ground. You extract oil and then you get local currency for that, which you can spend, which also benefits the whole country. You spend it inside your country, you trade, you hire people to work for you, and so on and so on. But in the end, it also makes your currency, your domestic currency, stronger, because like now you need to buy a lot of local currency units to convert from dollars. And that's why the exchange rate, the national exchange rate, increases. So basically, now your currency becomes more expensive in dollar terms, which is good if you want to go, for example, abroad. Like if you want to go abroad and consume there, that's perfect for you. Like you can buy more dollars with one currency unit. That's okay. However, it means that everything else in your country becomes expensive, because like previously, one guy working at the factory, like it wasn't the guy who was working in this oil extraction company. No, it was a guy working at the factory. He was earning, let's say, 10 peso, like 10 pesos, which was worth $1. But now imagine that the currency rate has changed, and now 10 peso become already not $1 but $3. If you want to go abroad, this is good for you. Like you can afford more things in these dollar terms. However, if you are working inside your country, you'll have actually a different effect. Like because it basically means that the guy who was receiving $0.1 in the factory before now needs much more money, now needs kind of a higher salary, because now in dollar terms it's already $0.3 per hour. And this is already something more important, because for example, foreign firms will find it less attractive now to go to this country. Like investments will go down because they say like, all right, now it's kind of too expensive to hire locals. I would better prefer somebody with like less of a salary demands. But at the same time, yeah, like for locals, nothing has changed. Yeah, they had the same salaries, they had the same same productivity. So, but at the same time, investments go down. Another way to see this is that non-tradable goods, so like the services, become relatively more expensive. Yeah, again, in the same way as like this goods. So like before they were worth like $1 per haircut. Now everything becomes more expensive and they're worth $3 per haircut. And this is kind of results in that the whole economy can become very unbalanced, so like it loses investments. And ER is national exchange rate. Yes, and overall, we see that this leads to the fact that non-tradables become more expensive. Yeah, and now you can import goods from abroad. You can import more goods, but at the same time, your non-tradables become relatively more expensive. Yeah, and then you say like, all right, I don't think I need a haircut. I will better go and buy something in the shop. Yeah, not a very good example. Let's say no, I don't need or I don't need, for example, a services of a cleaning person now anymore. I'll better go and buy a vacuum cleaner for cheap. And this person who was like cleaning places before now becomes like very disadvantaged in the sense that like the salary of this worker didn't change. So the guy doesn't demand more money. But at the same time, in relative terms, his salary is increasing because instead of his services, we can buy a vacuum cleaner and substitute it. And now vacuum cleaner becomes actually cheaper because we can afford more merchandise imports from abroad. And this is something that like should be taken control of. All right, yeah, I will send this presentation. All right, this is it about this set of lecture slides. So now let's have a break. Now let's have a break of like 15 minutes. And then we can, yeah, let's reconvene at 10 sharp. The second set of slides. 20 minutes. All right, let's make it 20 minutes. So like 10:05. 10:05, we meet back.